Hi, Anne-Marie here, and today I'm sharing Cute Cards Quick number 6. Each video in this series features a simple cutting template to use up an entire 6x6 paper pad to quickly make a bunch of cue cards. If you're interested in my other 6x6 paper pads to cards videos, I will add a link here and in the description box below to a playlist with all the Cute Cards Quick templates that I've shared so far. The formula we're using today will give us about 1 1/3 as many cards as there are pages in the paper pad if you provide your own sentiment. I ended up using all the sentiments that were in the paper pad, which was the equivalent of 6 of the pages. So I only ended up with 23 cards from a 24-page paper pad and then some extra sentiments that were left over. But if I had stamped or die cut, I would have ended up with closer to 32 cards. The 6x6 paper pad I'm using today is by Echo Park. It's called Flower Garden. It has this pretty springy color palette and lots of nice B-sides and floral patterns. The papers are double-sided, which gives me lots of mix and match options. I am going to pull out and cut apart all the sentiments in the paper pad at this point, as I mentioned. But again, that's completely up to you if you want to do that or not. So here's the cutting template we're going to use today for the remaining 18 papers. I'm going to first rotate them. So I'm going to cut across the bottom, and I'm making 2 cuts along the bottom, one at the 1/4 inch mark and another at the 1/2 inch mark. So this leaves us with a 5 1/4 by 6 inch piece, which I'm going to turn right side up, and then I'm cutting it into 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inch pieces. So you only have to make 2 cuts to achieve that. I cut a 1 inch piece from the right hand side, and then I cut a 3 inch piece from the left hand side. So I ended up with 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inch pieces. All right, so then I matched up my 2 inch pieces and my 3 inch pieces. Just 2 that I felt went together well, pushed everything else to the side. I first took that 2 inch piece and I used a border punch along the right hand side. Then I adhered the 3 inch piece to the right side of the card. These pieces require a 1/4 inch margin on the top, right, and bottom. And then the 2 inch piece I adhered on the left, again with a 1/4 inch margin on the top, left, and bottom. And for some reason, I found this easier to do when the card front turned upside down. I really don't know why. I'm not sure why, but it was easier for me. So they do look reversed temporarily in the video, but you'll also see when I turn the cards back up, that's going to be how it looks. That's the finished background. After the 2 and 3 inch pieces were all adhered, I went back and found the 1/4 inch strips to use on each as an accent along the bordered edge. At this point, I also selected a sentiment and laid those to the side, and I adhered them with foam tape off camera. So you can see, you've got the bigger chunk on the right, the bordered chunk on the left, and then the little accent strip. When I adhered the sentiment little panel, I aimed for the sweet spot of the intersecting thirds in the upper left when I did that. Here are some close-ups for this main style of card that I created. I also added some glitter or bling or whatever, some shine, because I added 3 sequins, 2 little dots of stickles, and then I accented the sentiment panels with a Wink of Stella pen for all of these cards. And now we have all these little strips left. So now I'm going to move on to the 1 inch strips. I ended up overlapping these at 90-degree angles, and then I cut on the diagonal to have mitered corners. You can do a faux mitering trick where you only have to cut 1, but I actually thought this was easier. Plus, I loved how I got to use all the tiny triangles, so I recommend doing it this way. I did pre-cut a scrap piece of cardstock at 4 inch by 5 1/4 inch to act as like a mat to adhere them to, and then I snipped off the excess from the ends of the strips. This also allowed me to have enough because I had to use like a couple tiny strips near the end. And I was able to get 3 cards from this design. I actually loved this so much. It was really fun for some reason. It was quick and it was satisfying, and I guess I just liked the design. I actually kind of want to do a whole 6x6 paper pad this way someday. I was able to get 3 cards from this design, and again, I adhered my sentiments in the upper left sweet spot. So now I'm going to move on to the teeny tiny triangles. These were the equivalent of cutting a 1 inch square in half. So in some places, I took 1 inch squares that were left from the cards that I just made using the 1-inch strips, and I left them intact and I used them whole. For the other squares that were like that, I went ahead and I cut them on the diagonal to use as mix and match triangles. This worked best with a 4x5-inch mat, so I am going to have to cut a little bit off of my actual card so that it looks like an even mat all the way around. But I needed an even amount of, like, even inches, if that makes sense. So I used 4x5. I also planned around the sentiment panel I wanted to use so that I did have enough to do the entire background. And as I placed everything down, I randomly alternated which way my diagonals went. Finally, since there were so many tiny pieces, I used the quilting technique to dry emboss the entire panel because that helps it adhere really, really well. Makes everything secure. All right, I only got one card from that because, again, these triangles were pretty small. All right, now for the final card. This was a bear. It sounded fun in theory, and I did love the finished product, even though I adhered it wonky, but it was just way too fiddly for me. It took way too long. I took all the 1/2-inch strips and I created a paper weaving with them. So I tried to adhere the first part of each strip as I went in an attempt to kind of help it hold its overall shape, but this really didn't work perfectly. If you remember back to like elementary school and you did a paper weaving with like 1-inch construction paper strips, that's easier just because construction paper is so much thinner and it's much more flexible. Since this is cardstock weight paper, it didn't want to weave as nicely. I couldn't bend it and literally weave it in and out over and under. I really had to just like flip up strips sometimes, or I had to like slide it in from the side. And so it was a little difficult. There was much wailing and gnashing of teeth. But I did eventually conquer it, and I chose a sentiment. So again, I just got one from that one. So that brings us up to 23 total cards. Here are all the cards I created. I really especially loved how the scrap ones turned out this round. The scraps are actually my favorites this time. And if I'd cut at the 1.5-inch mark instead of the 2-inch mark, I could have had some additional 1/2-inch pieces for weaving and made a few more cards. But again, it was not totally enjoyable to do, even though I loved how it looked. So I'm not sure I would have loved that. So this is probably for the best. But you do what works for you. All right. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing or sharing. I will see you soon with a new video. And in the meantime, I hope you have a scrappy, happy week. Bye.